The North Atlantic Ocean churned beneath Rigel Station Alpha like a beast in perpetual fury, turning the massive oil rig into an island of steel that swayed and creaked with each passing wave. By 0600 hours, the winds had already picked up to 25 knots and the day's real challenges were just beginning. Smart workers stayed on their assigned levels during weather like this, focused on indoor tasks and maintenance checks, waiting for the sea to settle its rage. Eliza Reeves wasn't most workers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She navigated the narrow walkways with the kind of practiced ease that came from 3 years of knowing exactly which handrails to trust and which sections of grating tended to collect ice during the morning hours. No special badge identified her position. No supervisor title announced her authority. Just well-worn steel-toed boots that had seen real emergencies, cargo pants with pockets full of precisely organized tools, and a simple ponytail tucked under a standard-issue hardhat. Everything about her seemed unremarkable, ordinary even, except for the way she moved. There was something deliberate about her stride, methodical and assured, like someone who'd learned that hesitation could be the difference between preventing a catastrophe and becoming part of one. The security officer at Checkpoint B barely looked up from his monitor, just waved her through with the mechanical efficiency of someone counting minutes until shift change. Eliza nodded once and kept walking, her toolkit secure in her grip, maintenance schedule loaded on her tablet. She'd been awake since 0400, sitting on the edge of her narrow bunk in the shared quarters that smelled perpetually of industrial soap and the peculiar mix of coffee and salt water that defined life on offshore platforms. The kind of living arrangement that reminded you daily that comfort was secondary to function and that personal space was a luxury the ocean didn't accommodate. Her maintenance kit sat open on her small desk, contents arranged with the precision that becomes second nature after enough emergency repairs at 3 a.m. Tools organized by frequency of use, diagnostic equipment calibrated and double-checked, and tucked in a side pocket, a folded piece of paper she hadn't looked at in weeks. She'd pulled it out that morning, held it up to the harsh fluorescent lighting, and made herself remember. A photograph taken during her first year on Rigel Alpha, 4 figures standing before the platform's main generator. Her in the middle, clipboard in hand, flanked by her training supervisor and 2 fellow maintenance technicians, all of them grinning with the satisfaction of having just completed a 72-hour emergency repair ahead of schedule. All of them looking younger than they had any right to be. The training supervisor had moved on to a cushy consulting job in Houston. According to his LinkedIn updates, he gave presentations on offshore safety protocols and had never been happier. One of the technicians had transferred to a land-based facility after a close call during a storm. Evacuation shook his confidence in ocean-based work. The other technician, Marcus, never made it past the incident last winter. A catastrophic equipment failure claimed his life during a routine inspection that went horribly wrong. His daughter was graduating from engineering school next month. Had her father's analytical mind and his father's stubborn dedication to getting things right the first time. And absolutely no idea that senior technician Eliza Reeves existed. Eliza had promised herself she'd complete one final inspection protocol before putting in for her own transfer to shore duty. Not for recognition, not for some kind of closure that workplace counselors talked about, but just to prove to herself that she could still face the section where it happened without falling apart. Inside the control center, the climate control system fought a losing battle against the perpetual humidity of ocean air. 2 supervisors lounged at monitoring stations, one wearing reflective safety glasses indoors like it was a fashion statement, the other scrolling through his phone between occasional glances at the readouts. "Help you?" Reflective glasses guy looked up, his tone carrying that particular brand of boredom that said he'd already decided. She wasn't important before she'd even opened her mouth. Eliza stopped in front of the monitoring station, her posture straight, but relaxed. Eliza Reeves, scheduled for the quarterly inspection on Sector 7G. Need to confirm the system lockout before I begin. She pulled out her tablet, brought up the work order, and placed it on the console between them. Phone guy looked her over like she was an unexpected item on his inventory list, his eyes taking in her standard issue coveralls, her lack of supervisor patches, the way she stood there waiting calmly for them to do their job. "You want a what now?" he asked, not bothering to mask his disinterest. "Inspect Sector 7G, she repeated, her voice steady as bedrock. "Quarterly protocol requires a full diagnostic before the incoming storm system." The two men exchanged glances, and Eliza caught the look that passed between them. It was the same look she'd seen countless times before in various forms from people who thought they knew what she was capable of, based on what they saw on the surface. Reflective glasses guy picked up her tablet and scanned the work order with theatrical attention, then dropped it back on the console like it might contaminate his fingers. "Yeah, I see the order. Here's the thing," he drawled, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual dismissiveness that came from holding a little bit of power over someone else's schedule. "We've got a VIP inspection tour coming through later. Sector 7G is off limits. Today, the work order is approved by Operations Director Harmon," Eliza said quietly, not moving from her position. "Don't care if it's approved by the Queen of England," phone guy chimed in, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for all of 8 months and thought that made him an expert. "That sector houses critical infrastructure. It's not a place for routine maintenance right now." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eliza didn't argue, didn't raise. Her voice didn't even flinch. She simply picked up her tablet, closed the work order, and stepped back toward a molded plastic chair, positioned near the entrance where she could see the main operations display stretching across the far wall. "You can wait all you want," reflective glasses guy called after her, his voice carrying that particular smugness that comes from winning a confrontation you manufactured yourself. "Answer's still going to be no today." She sat down, placed her toolkit at her feet, and folded her hands in her lap. From where she sat, she could see the schematics for Sector 7G displayed on one of the secondary monitors. Equipment status. Indicators all showing green, but something about the power consumption reading seemed off by a few percentage points. Not enough to trigger any alarms, but enough that someone who knew the system intimately would notice. The two supervisors went back to their monitors, shaking their heads and exchanging remarks about maintenance workers who didn't understand the bigger picture of platform operations. Some people get assigned to a critical system once and think they're suddenly operations specialists. One of them muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Eliza closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her. The low hum of the control room equipment, the distant thud of hydraulic systems, the occasional ping of incoming communications. Sounds that had been the backdrop to her professional life for 3 years. Sounds that still featured in her dreams. Both the good ones and the ones that woke her up sweating in her bunk, with the memory of alarms wailing and Marcus's voice cutting out mid-sentence. The minutes ticked by steadily in the controlled climate of the command center. Every so often, one of the supervisors would glance her way and shake his head like she was a problem that would eventually solve itself, if they just ignored her long enough. Eliza sat perfectly still, her breathing controlled and efficient. Her patience, the kind that came from learning to wait in places where rushing could get people killed. A young operations intern walked past, carrying a stack of printouts, the crisp collar of his company-issued shirt still stiff with newness. He looked at Eliza with curious eyes, taking in the stillness. The way someone could sit in an uncomfortable chair without checking the time or scrolling through a phone for distraction. "Ma'am," the intern said, slowing his pace. "You okay waiting here?" Eliza opened her eyes, nodded once, but said nothing. The young man hesitated, then continued on his way, but he looked back twice before disappearing into the adjacent office. Something about the way Eliza sat there, completely still and focused, reminded him of his mother. Career Coast Guard officers had that same quality. They could wait endlessly if necessary, and they never seemed to doubt that their patience would eventually yield results. Inside the control center, the climate system hummed its perpetual battle against the ocean air, and Eliza Reeves continued to wait. She'd made a promise to someone who couldn't fulfill it himself anymore, and she intended to see it through, no matter how long it took, or how many people thought she was wasting her time. Sector 7G waited too, its subtle anomalies, visible only to someone who knew exactly what to look for. In the main operations room, the morning staff was transitioning to the day shift. Engineers and technicians filed in for the handover briefing, carrying insulated mugs of coffee and tablets filled with the day's priorities. Room buzzed with the particular energy of shift change, a mixture of fatigue and fresh focus as information transferred from those ending their 12 hours to those just beginning. The same two supervisors who had turned Eliza away were now reporting to their relief, highlighting the VIP tour scheduled for later and emphasizing the importance of everything running smoothly. Reflective glasses guy was gesturing toward the entrance where Eliza still sat, apparently finding her continued presence both amusing and irritating. "I'm telling you, she's been sitting there for over 2 hours," he was saying, gesturing with his coffee mug like he was describing something inexplicable. "Just staring at the displays like she's trying to will herself access to Sector 7G. A cluster of newly arrived technicians glanced her way. These were the younger ones, fresh from training programs on the mainland, still dealing with the adjustment to platform life and the complex hierarchy that defined operations in isolated environments. Their company badges still looked pristine, and their confidence was the particular kind that came from not yet understanding how much they didn't know. "What's her deal?" asked one, a guy with a Houston accent and enough bravado for 3 people. "Says she needs to inspect Sector 7G, reflective glasses guy replied, shaking his head with the weary tolerance of someone explaining something obvious. "Got a work order that says she's qualified, but come on. Look at her. Standard tech coveralls, no specialist designation, probably ran basic diagnostics a few times, and thinks that counts as critical systems experience." Soft laughter rippled through the group, the kind that comes easy when you're new and eager to align yourself with the established order rather than question it. "Did you check her clearance level, though?" The young intern from earlier had returned, data tablet still in hand, his voice cutting through the chatter with the kind of observation that comes from actually reviewing information instead of making assumptions. "She's got level 4 certification. That's higher than most senior techs. Probably a database error," someone suggested with a dismissive wave. "Or maybe she worked in admin before transferring to maintenance," another added as if that explained everything. "Yeah, well, database error or not, managing documentation doesn't make you qualified to access critical systems during a VIP inspection day," reflective glasses guy declared with the confidence of someone who'd been supervising for all of 2 years and thought that made him an authority on everything platform-related. The conversation continued to flow around the room, each comment adding another layer to the narrative they were constructing about the woman waiting quietly at the entrance. She was overreaching, trying to pad her experience record, someone who'd completed basic training modules and confused that with genuine expertise. The kind of person who didn't understand that platform operations were about carefully managed protocols, not individual initiative. Nobody noticed the man who had entered through the side door of the operations room. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. The way veteran platform managers learned to walk after enough years of being the person everyone turned to when systems didn't behave as expected. Operations Director Simon Harmon was 54 years old and had been working offshore installations since before some of these supervisors had finished high school. He'd managed platforms in the North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and 3 different deepwater operations, overseeing emergency responses during 2 hurricanes, and implemented safety protocols that had become industry standards. His uniform was clean but functional, worn enough to show it was part of daily life rather than for appearances. His face carried the weathered look of someone who'd spent serious time in serious weather, and his eyes held the kind of experience that came from making decisions that other people never had to consider. He'd come to the control center for a routine systems review before the VIP tour, the kind of preparation that kept executives impressed and funding for upgrades flowing. But what he was hearing wasn't routine at all. "I'm just saying," one of the younger technicians was explaining, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never been tested by anything more challenging than a simulation. "If you want to play with critical systems, get the proper certifications first. Don't waste supervisor time with inappropriate access requests." Harmon stopped walking, turned toward the voices and listened. "She's probably angling for a promotion to the mainland office," another technician added, his words drawing appreciative nods from his peers. "Wants to tell the transfer board she has experience with critical systems. Or maybe she's building her resume," reflective glasses guy suggested, his voice heavy with disdain. "Maintenance tech tackles critical infrastructure inspection. Looks good on LinkedIn." The laughter that followed had an edge to it now, the kind that shifted from casual amusement to something meaner, without anyone noticing the transition. Harmon had heard enough. He'd spent enough years in offshore operations to recognize the sound of people who thought they knew everything about someone they'd never bothered to properly evaluate. He turned and walked toward the entrance, leaving the briefing group to their jokes and assumptions. He had a feeling those jokes were about to become extremely uncomfortable for everyone involved. The chill of the climate-controlled room contrasted sharply with the growing tension Harmon felt. Even after all these years managing offshore operations, the disconnect between what appeared on paper and what happened in practice still sometimes took him by surprise. He pulled his security badge from his pocket and started walking toward the entrance, his steps measured and deliberate. That's when he saw her. She was exactly where the supervisors had said she'd be, sitting in a molded plastic chair near the entrance. But seeing her in person, Harmon understood immediately why the others had gotten it so wrong. They were seeing her coveralls, her lack of specialized patches, her seemingly junior position. They weren't seeing her. She sat with perfect stillness, back straight but not rigid, hands folded but ready to move. Her breathing was controlled, efficient. She wasn't fidgeting with impatience or scrolling through her phone, or showing any sign of the restless energy that characterized most people in waiting situations. She was a study in controlled awareness, the kind you developed in environments where missing details could lead to disaster. Harmon had seen that particular stillness before, in veteran Coast Guard rescue divers preparing for difficult operations, in senior engineers about to attempt complex repairs in dangerous conditions, in platform workers who'd learned that survival sometimes meant being able to focus completely until the right moment for action arrived. As he approached, she turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence without breaking her composure. That's when he noticed it. On the sleeve of her standard issue coveralls, nearly hidden by the fold of fabric as she sat, was a small patch that had been partly obscured by what looked like deliberate wear. It wasn't decorative or prominent. It was functional, a designation that those who needed to know would recognize immediately. Harmon's stride faltered for just a moment. The patch was simple but unmistakable. A stylized atom with the letters ERT beneath it in faded thread. Emergency Response Team, but it was the additional marking below the standard design that made Harmon's professional interest sharpen instantly, a small red line bordering the patch, the indicator of senior status within the specialized unit. The woman sitting before him wasn't some routine maintenance technician overreaching her qualifications. She was part of the platform's elite troubleshooting team, the specialists who were called in when standard procedures failed and when failures threatened to cascade into catastrophes. The kind of personnel whose training was so specialized that most platforms had only 2 or 3 on staff at any given time. Everything about the morning suddenly made perfect, alarming sense. "Ms. Reeves," Harmon said quietly, his voice carrying the respect that came from recognizing someone whose qualifications exceeded what their appearance suggested. Eliza looked up at him with gray eyes that held a depth he couldn't quite read. There was something in her gaze that reminded him of deep water. Calm on the surface, but with currents running underneath that you underestimated at your peril. "Director Harmon," she replied, her voice neutral but not disrespectful. She'd clearly recognized him immediately, probably from the way he carried himself more than his identification badge. "I couldn't help but notice you're waiting to access Sector 7G, he kept his voice conversational. "That's an unusual request on a day with executive visitors scheduled." She didn't rush to explain, didn't try to overwhelm him with justifications, didn't resort to complaining about the supervisors who had denied her access. Eliza just looked at him with those steady gray eyes and waited. "It is," she finally replied, offering neither elaboration nor apology. "Mind if I ask why that particular sector needs inspection today?" Harmon asked. Eliza studied his face for a long moment, reading things in his expression and posture that the younger supervisors had completely missed. She was evaluating his receptiveness, his experience level, his likelihood of understanding what she couldn't state outright in a public space. All the subtle assessments that separated people who dealt with genuine emergencies from people who only followed procedures. Then she spoke 3 words that confirmed everything Harmon suspected and feared. "Pattern anomaly detected." Pattern anomaly, the term used by the emergency response team when they identified subtle deviations in system operations that didn't trigger standard alarms, but that experienced specialists recognized as precursors to potential failures, where the difference between routine variation and early warning signs was measurable only by those with the right training and experience. Harmon felt something shift in his professional assessment of the situation. A combination of respect, concern, and the sudden understanding that he was looking at a warning sign that couldn't be ignored. "What's your specialty code?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "Echo 7. The designation hit him like a physical blow. Echo 7, the specialty code for catastrophic prevention, the highest level of system analysis. Certification available to platform personnel. The specialists who were trained to identify problems before they manifested, who worked from subtle indicators that most monitoring systems weren't calibrated to detect." Standing in front of him, waiting patiently in the control room entrance, was a woman whose expertise literally defined the difference between safe operations and potential disaster, and his supervisors had been dismissing her for over 2 hours. The weight of that realization settled on Harmon's shoulders like physical pressure. He thought about the conversation he'd overheard, the casual dismissal, the complete failure to recognize that they were in the presence of someone whose certification level meant she could override nearly anyone on the platform if she deemed it necessary for safety. "Christ," he said quietly, then caught himself. "I apologize, Ms. Reeves. Your qualification level should have been respected immediately." "Most people don't check the database thoroughly," Eliza replied, her voice carrying the kind of resignation that came from years of being underestimated despite her credentials. "Most people don't need to." Harmon looked back toward the control room where her work order had been dismissed, then toward the operations staff who were still engaged in their shift handover. His expression hardened as he considered the implications of what he'd just learned. "Ms. Reeves," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 25 years in offshore operations. "You'll inspect Sector 7G immediately." Something shifted in Eliza's posture at those words. Not relief exactly, but a subtle change from patience to readiness. She'd been prepared to wait as long as necessary, but she'd also been prepared for this moment, when someone finally recognized her authority rather than dismissing her presence. "Thank you, Director," she said simply. Harmon turned and walked back toward the control room, his stride purposeful and direct. Behind him, Eliza stood and collected her toolkit, her movements efficient and precise. The waiting was over. Inside the control room, the shift handover conversation died the moment. Harmon walked through the door. His expression carried the particular gravity that experienced platform workers recognized immediately, the look of someone who had just discovered a problem that couldn't be ignored. Everyone in the room suddenly found their data tablets or system readouts extremely interesting. "Which one of you denied access to Sector 7G for Ms. Reeves?" His voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made people's spines straighten involuntarily. Reflective glasses guy raised his hand reluctantly. "That was me, sir, but she's not on the VIP clearance list, and we're locking down critical sectors for the executive tour today." "Did you check her qualification level?" Harmon asked. "Yes, sir. But did you actually look at her specialty code?" The supervisor's mouth opened and closed without producing words. "The woman you've kept waiting for over 2 hours," Harmon continued, his voice deadly quiet, "has Echo 7 certification and emergency response team senior status. She outranks nearly everyone in this room on matters of system integrity and catastrophic prevention." The room had gone completely silent. Even the background hum of equipment seemed to have faded to nothing. "But more importantly," Harmon continued, his eyes sweeping the room like searchlights, "she has identified a pattern anomaly in Sector 7G that warrants immediate investigation." He turned to the shift supervisor, a woman with 15 years of platform experience who had been watching the exchange with growing concern. "Janice, get Sector 7G prepped for full diagnostic access. All systems available for inspection, no restrictions." "Sir," one of the junior supervisors interjected, "the insurance protocols for the VIP tour require limited access to critical. She's not a visitor." Harmon interrupted, his tone suggesting that further objections would not be welcome. "Ms. Reeves is Echo 7 certified. Her assessment takes priority over everything except evacuation protocols. Are we clear?" A chorus of "yes, sir" followed him as he turned back toward Eliza. Behind him, the control room erupted in hushed conversations and frantic database checks. Echo 7, emergency response team, pattern anomalies. The pieces were starting to come together, and nobody was making jokes anymore. The young intern who had mentioned her clearance level earlier sat quietly at his station, his tablet forgotten in his hands. He'd recognized there was something different about the woman who had waited so patiently, something that didn't fit the easy dismissals his colleagues had made. Now he understood what it was. Expertise, the kind that was earned through rigorous training and demonstrated competence rather than claimed through posturing. Outside in the entrance area, Harmon approached Eliza directly. She looked up as he neared, and he saw something different in her eyes now. Not anticipation exactly, but a focused readiness, like a precision instrument being calibrated for use. "Sector 7G is being prepared for your inspection," he said simply. "Full access granted." Eliza stood, shouldered her toolkit, and nodded. Once, "Thank you, Director." As they walked toward the secure elevator that would take them to the sector in question, Harmon found himself matching her pace. There was something professionally humbling about walking beside someone whose specialized training represented the platform's last line of defense against catastrophic failure. Someone who could identify problems before standard monitoring systems could detect them, who could interpret subtle variations that most engineers would dismiss as background noise. "May I ask you something?" he said as they approached the elevator. "Of course. Why not just override them? With your clearance level, you could have forced the issue." She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, so softly he almost missed it, because sometimes it's better to know who's making bad decisions before you really need them to make good ones. Harmon nodded, understanding completely. In their line of work, knowing who would follow procedure blindly versus who could recognize genuine expertise could be the difference between smooth operations and disaster. Sometimes the most valuable information wasn't in the system readouts, but in how people responded when tested. They reached the secure elevator, and Harmon waved his badge over the scanner. The doors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing the burnished steel interior that would carry them down to Sector 7G. Cool air rushed out, a contrast to the warmer temperature of the main level. Inside, the elevator descended smoothly, its digital display tracking their progress as they moved deeper into the platform's infrastructure. A small crowd had gathered in the control room to watch their departure. Word traveled quickly on isolated platforms, especially word about potential problems with critical systems. The young intern from earlier stood near the monitoring station, his expression showing something approaching admiration. A handful of technicians had found reasons to be in the vicinity, their earlier dismissals forgotten in the face of dawning realization. Eliza stood calmly in the elevator, her focus already shifting to the task ahead. She ran through a mental checklist of what she would need to examine first, which systems might show the subtle variations that had caught her attention during routine data review. Her movements were economical, professional, with none of the nervous energy that often characterized younger technicians heading into challenging situations. She removed a specialized diagnostic tablet from her toolkit and powered it on, its display showing customized software that few on the platform were trained to interpret. The patterns on the screen would look like random fluctuations to most observers, but to someone with Echo 7 training, they told a story of system behavior that warranted immediate attention. Harmon watched as she calibrated the device, noting the precision of her movements and the complete absence of wasted motion. This wasn't someone performing for an audience or trying to impress a superior. This was a specialist preparing to do exactly what she was trained for, with the calm competence that came from absolute certainty in one's abilities. "Marcus Davis," Harmon's breath caught. "That's impossible." Marcus Davis died in the incident last winter. "Yes," Eliza agreed, her focus never wavering from the evidence before her. "But his access credentials remained active in the system. Someone has been using them to implement these changes for the past 6 months, starting 3 weeks after his death." The control room had gone completely silent as this information registered. Someone had been using a dead man's credentials to systematically sabotage the platform's safety systems. The implications were as disturbing as they were clear. This was an inside job, executed by someone who understood not just the technical systems, but the administrative oversights that would allow such activity to go undetected. Eliza was already moving to the next phase of her investigation, tracing login locations and access patterns. Her methodology wasn't just technically precise. It reflected a deep understanding of how people behaved when they thought no one was watching. She wasn't just looking for digital evidence, but for the human patterns behind it. "The access points are limited," she noted, studying the data with intense concentration. All modifications were made from 3 specific terminals on the platform, all during night shift hours when staffing is minimal. She pulled up the access logs for those terminals, cross-referencing them with personnel schedules and security camera footage. The patterns began to emerge, not from random data points, but from the consistent behaviors that even the most careful saboteur couldn't completely eliminate. There, she said finally, isolating a recurring pattern in the access. Data. Terminal 47B in the engineering section. Used for system modifications at 0230 hours every third night for the past 6 months. Security cameras in that section show the same individual present during those time frames. She pulled up the security footage, enhancing the image to reveal a face that made Harmon's professional concern transform instantly into personal betrayal. "Lawrence Chun," he said, recognition and disbelief mingling in his voice. "My deputy director for engineering operations." Eliza nodded once, her expression showing neither triumph nor surprise. She had followed the evidence where it led, without preconceptions or personal considerations. That was what Echo 7 certification truly represented, the ability to see patterns as they existed rather than as people expected or wanted them to be. The modifications were scheduled to create catastrophic failures during today's emergency response drill, she said, continuing her analysis without pause. The VIP visit was to include a demonstration of the platform's emergency protocols. If these modifications had remained undetected, the demonstration would have triggered cascading system failures across critical infrastructure. Harmon's mind raced through the implications. The executives, the response teams, the entire command structure would have been concentrated in the control room during that demonstration. "Yes," Eliza confirmed, her voice steady despite the severity of what they were discussing. Maximum impact, maximum visibility, and with the modified evacuation protocols, potentially maximum casualties. The control room's atmosphere had transformed completely. The same people who had dismissed Eliza hours earlier were now watching her work with a mixture of professional respect and personal gratitude. She had uncovered a threat that would have remained invisible to standard procedures, a threat that might have cost many of them their lives. Harmon activated his communication link to security. "This is Director Harmon. I need a security team to locate and detain Deputy Director Lawrence Chen immediately. Full isolation protocols, no system access, no communications. This is a code black situation." He turned back to Eliza, who was already implementing containment measures for the compromised systems. "How quickly can you restore the original protocols?" "I've already started," she replied, her fingers moving across the diagnostic interface with practiced efficiency. "I'm isolating the compromised code segments and replacing them with verified backups from the secure archive. Critical systems will be restored within the hour. Complete verification will take approximately 6 hours." Harmon nodded, watching as she continued working with the focused intensity that came from understanding exactly how much depended on her expertise. In the monitoring room, the security team was already tracking Chun's movements through the platform. The VIP visit had been quietly postponed. Emergency teams were being positioned strategically throughout critical areas. And through it all, Eliza Reeves continued her methodical work, undistracted by the crisis unfolding around her. This was what she had been trained for, to identify threats others couldn't see, to remain focused when others might panic, to restore safety when systems had been compromised. By 1400 hours, word had spread through the entire platform. Every engineer, every technician, every operations specialist within Rigel Station Alpha's massive structure had heard some version of the story. The maintenance technician they had dismissed as overreaching had uncovered a sophisticated sabotage plot that would have triggered catastrophic failures during the executive demonstration. In the platform's secure conference room, the emergency response team had assembled for an urgent briefing. The room's reinforced walls and specialized communications equipment reflected its purpose as a command center during crisis situations. Maps of the platform's layout covered one wall, while real-time system status displays dominated another. The atmosphere was tense but focused, the particular energy of professionals confronting a threat they were trained to handle. Harmon stood at the head of the table, his expression grave as he addressed the assembled team. Security Chief Rivera, a former naval officer with 20 years of experience in maritime security, sat to his right. Operations Manager Patel, whose expertise in platform logistics had guided them through 2 hurricane evacuations, sat to his left. Around the table, department heads and response specialists waited with the contained readiness of people accustomed to high-stakes situations. At 0930 this morning, Harmon began, his voice carrying the weight of professional concern tempered by years of crisis management experience. Specialist Eliza Reeves identified systematic tampering with multiple critical safety systems throughout Sector 7G. Her forensic analysis has confirmed deliberate sabotage designed to create catastrophic failures during today's scheduled emergency demonstration. The room remained silent as this information registered. These were veteran platform personnel who understood immediately what such sabotage could have meant. Not just equipment damage, but potential loss of life on a massive scale. The evidence points conclusively to Deputy Director Lawrence Chun. Harmon continued. Security has him in custody, and initial questioning suggests industrial espionage rather than terrorism. He's refused to provide further details without legal representation. What's the current status of the compromised systems? Asked Rivera, her question reflecting the professional priority of securing the platform before addressing motivations. Specialist Reeves has implemented full containment and restoration protocols, Harmon replied. Critical systems have been verified and returned to original configurations. Her team is completing secondary verification on all related subsystems. And we're confident we've identified all compromised areas? This from Patel, whose responsibilities included ensuring the platform could maintain essential operations during crises. That's what I'd like Specialist Reeves to address directly, Harmon said, turning toward the door as Eliza entered the conference room. She moved with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did, carrying her specialized diagnostic tablet and a data drive containing her complete analysis. Nothing about her appearance had changed since the morning. The same standard issue coveralls, the same simple ponytail, the same unassuming presence. Yet everything about how the room responded to her had transformed completely. The department heads straightened in their chairs. Conversations quieted immediately. Even Rivera, whose military background made her naturally skeptical of civilian specialists, gave Eliza her complete attention. This wasn't the deference you showed to rank or authority. This was the respect you accorded to demonstrated expertise that had potentially saved hundreds of lives. Eliza took her place at the conference table without ceremony, placing her equipment before her with methodical precision. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm certainty it had maintained throughout the crisis, neither elevated by the recognition nor diminished by the gravity of the situation. We've completed primary restoration of all critical systems. She began, bringing up diagnostic displays on the room's main screen. The sabotage was sophisticated, but followed consistent patterns that made it possible to identify all compromised subsystems. We've implemented triple verification protocols to ensure no modifications remain undetected. She walked them through the technical details with remarkable clarity, translating complex system vulnerabilities into explanations that even non-specialists could understand. There was nothing condescending in her approach, just the precise communication of someone who knew that shared understanding was essential for effective crisis management. The most concerning aspect, she continued, bringing up a timeline of the modifications, is that these changes were implemented gradually over 6 months, each one subtle enough to avoid detection by standard monitoring protocols. Only when viewed as a pattern did the intention become clear. How did you identify the pattern when automated systems missed it? Asked the head of IT security, the professional curiosity in his voice reflecting both admiration and concern about his department's oversight. Eliza didn't use the question as an opportunity for self-promotion or to highlight the shortcomings. Of others, her response was straightforward and focused on improving system security rather than assigning blame. The automated systems are designed to detect deviations from established parameters, she explained. These modifications were specifically engineered to remain within those parameters, while altering the timing of critical operations. The pattern became visible only when examining system behavior across multiple scenarios rather than in isolation. She brought up a simulation showing how the modifications would have interacted during an emergency response. The visualization demonstrated with chilling clarity how failures would have cascaded through supposedly redundant systems, creating a catastrophic sequence that would have overwhelmed conventional containment measures. If these modifications had remained undetected, Operations Manager Patel said slowly, we would have lost the platform. And most of the personnel on it, Security Chief Rivera added, her military experience allowing her to recognize the strategic targeting behind the sabotage. Eliza nodded once, neither dramatizing nor minimizing the assessment. The timing and focus of the modifications suggest that was the intended outcome. The room fell silent as the full implications registered. This wasn't just industrial sabotage, aimed at damaging equipment or disrupting operations. This was a sophisticated attack designed to cause maximum casualties among the platform's leadership and visiting executives. How did you know to look in Sector 7G specifically? Asked the maintenance director, giving voice to the question that many had been considering. The modifications were spread across multiple systems. What led you there first? Eliza was quiet for a moment, and something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. Not hesitation exactly, but a brief acknowledgement of the personal element that professional discussions often overlooked. I was reviewing standard operational data last night, she said, her voice maintaining its measured tone. Power consumption patterns in Sector 7G showed micro-fluctuations that didn't align with normal operational sequences. They weren't significant enough to trigger alerts, but they matched anomalies I'd observed during the incident last winter. She didn't need to elaborate further. Everyone in the room knew what the incident last winter meant. The equipment failure that had claimed Marcus Davis's life had been thoroughly investigated and officially classified as a tragic accident caused by system overload during the storm. But Eliza's words carried a different implication, that perhaps it hadn't been an accident at all. You're suggesting the sabotage began before Davis's death, Harmon said, making the connection immediately. The evidence suggests his death may have been the first test of the modified systems, Eliza confirmed, bringing up comparison data that showed subtle similarities between current anomalies and readings from the day of the incident. And his credentials were then used to implement the broader modifications, likely to redirect any potential investigation. The professional implications of this revelation rippled through the room. Not only had they nearly experienced a catastrophic attack, but they may have already lost one of their own to an earlier phase of the same sabotage effort. The technical threat had been contained, but the human cost had already begun before they'd recognized the danger. We'll need to reopen the investigation into Davis's death, Rivera said, her expression hardening with the particular determination of someone who protected her people fiercely and took threats against them personally. Agreed, Harmon said. But our immediate priority is ensuring the platform remains secure. Specialist Reeves, what additional measures do you recommend? What followed was a master class in security protocol implementation. Eliza outlined a comprehensive approach that balanced immediate threat containment with long-term system resilience. Her recommendations weren't just technically sound. They reflected a deep understanding of how human operators interacted with complex systems and where vulnerabilities typically emerged from that interaction. She proposed modifications to monitoring protocols that would detect the subtle patterns she had identified. She recommended changes to access verification that would prevent credential misuse while maintaining operational efficiency. She outlined training adjustments that would help personnel recognize anomalies that automated systems might miss. Throughout her presentation, she maintained the focused precision that had characterized her approach from the beginning. There was no grandstanding, no attempt to leverage the crisis for personal advancement, no hint of satisfaction at having her expertise finally recognized. There was only the methodical commitment to ensuring such vulnerabilities couldn't be exploited again. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Rivera spoke, her voice carrying the particular weight of someone who rarely offered praise, but meant it absolutely when she did. Exceptional work, Specialist Reeves. The platform owes you a debt that can't be properly measured. Eliza acknowledged the comment with a simple nod, neither dismissing the recognition nor seeming to require it. Her focus remained on the technical challenges still before them, rather than the crisis they had averted. "We should implement these measures immediately," she said, returning the conversation to the practical steps that would secure the platform. "I've prepared implementation protocols that minimize disruption to essential operations while maximizing security coverage." As the meeting continued, the response team divided into action groups, each taking responsibility for specific aspects of the security enhancement plan. Eliza moved between groups, providing technical guidance where needed, answering questions with precise clarity, ensuring that each team understood not just what they needed to do, but why it mattered. Through it all, her calm competence remained the steady center on which the response effort organized itself. Not because she demanded leadership or sought control, but because her expertise naturally drew others to trust her judgment and follow her recommendations. By 1800 hours, the platform had transformed from a potential disaster site to a model of enhanced security protocols. Systems had been restored, vulnerabilities addressed, monitoring enhanced. The VIP visit had been rescheduled with the executives, informed only that technical issues had required attention. Chun remained in custody, awaiting transfer to mainland authorities once the weather allowed helicopter operations. In the main mess hall, the evening shift was gathering for dinner. Before taking over operations for the night, the room buzzed with conversations about the day's events, each retelling adding new details and interpretations to a story that would likely become part of platform lore. The two supervisors who had dismissed Eliza that morning sat at a corner table, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Their colleagues' attitudes toward them had shifted perceptibly, not hostile exactly, but carrying the particular coolness reserved for those whose poor judgment had nearly contributed to disaster. "We should apologize," Reflective Glasses Guy said quietly, his voice lacking any of the dismissive tone it had carried earlier. "With what words?" His colleague replied, staring into his coffee. "What do you say to someone who just prevented a catastrophe you nearly helped cause by blocking her investigation?" Across the room, a table of senior engineers was engaged in a technical discussion about the sabotage methods and how they might have been detected earlier. They spoke with the focused intensity of professionals confronting vulnerabilities in with the focused intensity of professionals confronting vulnerabilities in focused in systems they had previously considered secure. The pattern recognition approach she used, one of them was saying, her voice low enough to maintain the conversation's privacy. "I've read about it in theoretical papers, but I've never seen it implemented in a real-world situation. That's the difference between Echo 7 certification and standard engineering training," another replied. "They're not just taught to maintain systems. They're trained to think like someone trying to defeat them." At the technicians' table, the younger personnel who had been so quick with their dismissive remarks that morning were having their own reckoning. They had learned something important about expertise, about respect, and about the difference between surface appearances and genuine capability. "I feel like an idiot," one of them admitted, pushing his food around his plate without appetite. "We all should," another replied. We judged her based on patches and position, instead of actually considering she might know what she was talking about. The young intern, Alex Karami, sat quietly, turning over the day's events in his mind. He'd recognized something different about Eliza when others hadn't, not because he was more perceptive, but simply because he'd bothered to check her actual credentials rather than making assumptions. Now he found himself wondering how many other instances of valuable expertise were being overlooked because they didn't match people's expectations of what knowledge looked like. Later that evening, as the platform's lighting shifted to night cycle illumination, Alex found himself walking toward the technical library where the recovery team was finalizing system verification. He told himself he was just going to check on the status updates, but part of him hoped he might catch a glimpse of the specialist who had transformed his understanding of what true expertise looked like. He found Eliza in the main terminal room, surrounded by diagnostic equipment, her focus entirely absorbed in final system checks. There was something almost meditative about her concentration, a complete immersion in the task that excluded all distractions. Alex approached hesitantly, uncertain whether he had the right to interrupt someone whose work had proven so crucial. "Specialist Reeves," he said quietly. Eliza looked up, and Alex saw something in her eyes that he hadn't expected. Not the intimidating intensity of a senior expert, but the patient focus of someone who remembered what it was like to be young and uncertain, and trying to find your place in a complex environment. "Alex, right," she said, and the intern felt a small thrill that his name had registered with someone whose day had involved uncovering a potentially catastrophic sabotage plot. "Yes, ma'am, I just wanted to. I mean what you did today." Alex stumbled over the words, trying to express something that felt too significant for his limited vocabulary. "You checked my credentials this morning," Eliza said simply, her observation cutting through his awkwardness, "when everyone else was making assumptions." Alex nodded, surprised she had noticed that detail amid everything else that had happened. "That was good instinct," she continued, her tone suggesting this wasn't empty praise but professional assessment. Technical expertise isn't always obvious from patches or position. Sometimes it's about who takes the time to verify rather than assume. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two generations of platform personnel, separated by experience but united by a shared commitment to precision and verification. "Can I ask you something?" Alex said finally. Eliza nodded. "How do you do it? How do you handle people dismissing your expertise, even when you know you're right?" Eliza considered the question with the same thoroughness she applied to technical problems, taking it seriously rather than offering a quick platitude. "You focus on the work, not the recognition," she said finally. "Being right isn't about winning arguments or getting credit. It's about ensuring systems function correctly and people remain safe, regardless of who gets acknowledged for it." She turned back to her diagnostic equipment, made a final adjustment, and closed the verification sequence. The system responded with a series of green confirmation indicators, all systems restored, all security protocols enhanced, all vulnerabilities addressed. "The most important expertise isn't the kind you wear on your sleeve," she added, powering down the equipment with methodical precision. "It's the kind you carry in your approach to problems. The willingness to look beyond what's obvious to find what matters." Alex nodded, sensing there was something profound in her words that he would understand more fully as his own experience deepened. Something about valuing substance over appearance, about the quiet confidence that came from genuine capability rather than external validation. As Eliza packed away her equipment, Alex noticed something on the workstation beside her, a folded photograph partially visible beneath her technical manual. The same photograph he'd glimpsed briefly that morning when she sat waiting in the buffet control center. 4 figures standing before the main generator, one of them the technician who had died the previous winter. "You knew him well?" Alex asked, nodding toward the photograph. Eliza was quiet for a moment, her movements pausing as she considered the question. "We worked together for 2 years," she said finally. "He was the one who encouraged me to pursue Echo 7 certification when everyone else said it was too specialized for someone in regular maintenance." Alex saw something shift in her expression, not grief exactly, but the particular weight that came from carrying someone else's belief in you after they were gone. He always said technical excellence was about seeing patterns others missed. She continued, her voice steady but carrying a depth that hadn't been present in her professional briefings. That the difference between good and exceptional wasn't just about what you knew, but about how you applied it when it mattered most. She carefully placed the photograph in her toolkit, alongside the specialized instruments that had helped her uncover the sabotage. The juxtaposition seemed fitting somehow, the personal motivation and the professional capability existing side by side, each informing the other. "That's why you noticed the anomalies when no one else did," Alex said. Understanding dawning. "You were looking with particular attention because of what happened to him." "I was looking properly," Eliza corrected gently. "Which is what anyone with the right training should have been doing. His death reminded me that system failures aren't just technical events, they have human consequences. That perspective changes how thoroughly you examine even minor anomalies." She closed her toolkit, checked her tablet one final time, and stood to leave. The verification was complete, the system secure, her obligation fulfilled. "The best way to honor expertise is to develop your own," she said to Alex, her words carrying the weight of someone who had learned this truth through experience rather than theory. Not to impress others or advance her position, but because excellence matters in itself, especially when lives depend on it. Alex nodded, recognizing that he was receiving something valuable, not just professional advice, but a perspective on technical work that transcended the usual focus on career advancement and recognition. Eliza was offering a glimpse of what it meant to pursue excellence for its own sake, to value precision and thoroughness, not because they brought rewards, but because they were the right approach to consequential work. As she walked toward the exit, Alex found himself standing a little straighter, his own perspective on his role shifting subtly but significantly. He had entered the technical library hoping to express appreciation to someone whose work had proven extraordinary. He was leaving with a deeper understanding of what extraordinary work actually required. Not just technical knowledge, but a fundamental commitment to getting things right, especially when no one was watching. The platform continued its night cycle. Operations around them, the distant hum of equipment, and the occasional announcement over the communication system, creating the familiar soundtrack of offshore life. But something had changed, not just in the enhanced security protocols now protecting critical systems, but in how at least some of the personnel viewed their responsibilities and the nature of genuine expertise. 3 months later, Alex Karami stood in the same control center where Eliza Reeves had been dismissed that fateful morning. But everything was different now. The supervisors who had blocked her investigation had been reassigned to remedial training positions on the mainland, replaced by senior personnel who understood that expertise came in many forms and that dismissing it based on superficial assessments could have catastrophic consequences. Alex himself was no longer just an intern. His attentiveness during the sabotage incident and his subsequent work implementing enhanced monitoring protocols had earned him a permanent position on the platform's technical staff. The identification badge hanging from his lanyard now carried the distinctive blue border that indicated specialized security clearance, not the highest level, but a significant step beyond entry-level access. The control room itself had been transformed. New monitoring systems implemented after the incident displayed not just standard operational parameters, but pattern recognition indicators that could identify subtle anomalies before they developed into serious issues. Wall displays now showed system relationships rather than isolated metrics, encouraging operators to consider how changes in one area might affect seemingly unrelated functions. Most significantly, the platform culture had shifted. The dismissive attitudes that had once been common among certain supervisors had been replaced by a more thoughtful approach to expertise and authority. Technical qualifications now carried more weight than position or seniority when safety concerns were raised, and verification had become standard practice rather than an optional step. Director Harmon had instituted what he called expertise recognition protocols throughout Rigel Alpha. Every shift now included designated specialists whose authority in their specific domains superseded normal hierarchical structures during potential safety situations. The days of dismissing concerns based on rank or appearance were officially over. "Morning briefing in 5 minutes," announced Operations Manager Patel as she entered the control room, tablet in hand. "We've got system upgrades scheduled for the eastern quadrant and weather moving in from the northwest. I want everyone fully engaged today." Alex nodded and completed his monitoring sequence, making final notations in the shift log before heading to the conference room. As he walked, he passed the same chair where Eliza had sat waiting with imperturbable patience 3 months earlier. The memory still carried a mixture of admiration and embarrassment, admiration for her calm persistence and embarrassment that the platform staff had required such dramatic evidence before recognizing her expertise. The conference room had been redesigned since the incident, with new technology and a different seating arrangement that literally placed technical specialists at the same table as management during briefings. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Expertise was now visibly valued alongside authority in the platform's operational structure. Alex took his place among the junior technical staff, still learning to navigate his new responsibilities, but increasingly confident in his developing skills. The room filled quickly as department representatives arrived for the morning briefing. Security Chief Rivera entered with her usual brisk efficiency, followed by maintenance coordinators and safety officers, each carrying tablets loaded with the day's priorities. Director Harmon was the last to arrive, accompanied by a visitor Alex didn't immediately recognize. The woman wore the standard issue coveralls of platform personnel, but with specialized patches indicating advanced technical certification. Her presence carried a quiet authority that seemed familiar somehow, though Alex couldn't immediately place where he might have seen her before. "Good morning, everyone," Harmon began, his voice carrying the balanced tone of a leader who had weathered a serious crisis and emerged with deeper wisdom. "Before we begin our standard briefing, I'd like to introduce our new head of technical integrity, who will be overseeing the implementation of our enhanced monitoring systems fleet-wide." He gestured to the woman beside him, and as she turned to face the room, Alex felt a jolt of recognition. The same composed expression, the same attentive eyes, the same unassuming competence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Many of you already know Eliza Reeves," Harmon continued. "Her work 3 months ago not only prevented a potential catastrophe on this platform, but revealed systemic vulnerabilities that needed addressing throughout our operations. The board has created this new position specifically to ensure that the lessons from that incident transform our entire approach to system security." The room's response was immediate and genuine. These weren't people applauding out of obligation or professional courtesy. These were colleagues who understood exactly what Eliza's expertise had meant for their safety, and who recognized the value of having that expertise guiding technical operations moving forward. Eliza acknowledged the reception with the same quiet composure she'd shown during the crisis, neither dismissing the recognition nor seeming defined by it. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm clarity that had guided them through the Sabotage recovery. "Thank you," she said simply. "The position is new, but the priority remains the same, ensuring that our technical systems operate with the integrity and security that our personnel deserve. I look forward to working with all of you to implement the enhanced protocols that will make incidents like the one we experienced impossible in the future." There was nothing grandiose in her statement, no hint of self-importance or authority for its own sake. There was only the steady commitment to excellence that had characterized her approach from the beginning, the focus on getting things right because people's lives depended on it. The briefing continued, with each department reporting on their current status and priorities. When Eliza's turn came, she provided a concise overview of the new monitoring systems being implemented, explaining complex technical enhancements in terms that made their purpose and value clear to everyone in the room. Her presentation wasn't just informative. It was a masterclass in technical communication, precise without being condescending, detailed without being overwhelming. As the meeting concluded and personnel began dispersing to their assignments, Alex found himself waiting near the door, hoping for a moment to welcome Eliza back to the platform. She noticed him as she gathered her materials, and something in her expression suggested she remembered their conversation in the technical library 3 months earlier. "Congratulations on the permanent position, Alex," she said as she approached, nodding toward his new identification badge. "Technical security specialist is an important role." "Thank you, ma'am," he replied, surprised and pleased that she had noted his advancement. "Your recommendations were a big part of why I got it." Eliza tilted her head slightly, her expression questioning. "You put my name in your implementation report," Alex explained. "Said I showed exceptional attention to verification protocols and system relationship awareness. Director Harmon mentioned it specifically during my evaluation." "I noted what?" "I observed," Eliza said simply. "Good technical work deserves recognition, especially when it demonstrates the right priorities." There was something profoundly affirming in her matter-of-fact acknowledgement, not effusive praise or exaggerated encouragement, but the straightforward recognition of work well done by someone whose standards were unquestionably high. "I've been implementing some of the pattern recognition approaches you used," Alex said, professional enthusiasm overcoming his usual reserve. "Integrated them into the daily monitoring protocols for the Eastern Quadrant systems." "Show me, Eliza," replied, her interest immediate and genuine. What followed wasn't the perfunctory attention of a superior humoring a junior staff member, but the engaged focus of one technical specialist genuinely interested in another's work. As Alex walked her through the monitoring modifications he'd developed, Eliza asked precise questions that reflected both her expertise and her respect for his developing skills. She didn't patronize or unnecessarily praise. She engaged professionally with his work on its merits. "You've extended the basic framework in an interesting direction," she observed as he showed her how he'd adapted her approach to account for weather-related variations in system performance. "Have you documented the methodology for the other monitoring stations?" "Working on it," Alex admitted. "I wanted to refine the parameters before implementing it more broadly." "Good instinct," Eliza nodded. "Technical innovations need proper testing before wide deployment. But this approach deserves broader application once you've validated the parameters." Her assessment carried the particular weight of expert recognition, not the general encouragement that might come from a supervisor trying to boost morale, but the specific acknowledgement that comes from someone who genuinely understands the value of what you've created. As they walked toward the Eastern Quadrant, where Alex's monitoring systems were being implemented, they passed several technical teams engaged in the platform-wide security enhancements that had followed the Sabotage incident. Workers who might once have paid little attention to a passing specialist now nodded respectfully to Eliza, their expressions reflecting the particular regard reserved for someone whose expertise had directly contributed to their safety. "Cultural shift has been significant," Eliza observed as they continued walking. "Technical qualification seems to carry more weight in operational decisions now." "Everything changed after the incident," Alex confirmed. Director Harmon implemented what he calls expertise-based authority protocols throughout the platform. Technical specialists can override standard procedures if they identify potential safety concerns, regardless of their position in the traditional hierarchy. Eliza nodded, her expression reflecting subtle satisfaction at this structural change. That's a significant improvement. Hierarchies have their place in operational efficiency, but they become dangerous when they prevent critical information from reaching decision makers. They reached the monitoring station where Alex's enhanced pattern recognition systems were being implemented. The displays showed not just the standard operational metrics, but visual representations of system, relationships and trend indicators that would highlight subtle anomalies long before they reached critical thresholds. You've implemented three-dimensional pattern mapping, Eliza noted, studying the displays with professional interest. That's an advanced approach for daily monitoring. Inspired by your forensic methods during the sabotage investigation, Alex acknowledged. I realized that if those patterns could be identified after the fact, we might be able to spot similar anomalies in real time with the right visualization tools. Eliza studied the system with focused attention, asking technical questions that pushed Alex to articulate the reasoning behind his design choices. This wasn't casual conversation. It was the kind of rigorous professional exchange that refined ideas and improved implementation. She didn't simply praise his work. She engaged with it seriously, treating it as a genuine contribution rather than a trainee exercise. You should document this approach formally, she said finally, not just for internal protocols, but for industry publication. This methodology has applications beyond our specific platform configuration. Alex looked surprised. Publication? I hadn't considered that. Technical innovations deserve broader sharing, Eliza replied. That's how field knowledge advances. Your approach to visual pattern recognition could benefit operations throughout the industry. There was something profoundly motivating in her matter-of-fact assessment, not empty encouragement, but the specific recognition that his work had value beyond its immediate application. The idea that his technical approach might contribute to industry-wide improvements hadn't occurred to him before, but Eliza's straightforward suggestion made it seem not just possible but appropriate. As they continued their inspection of the Eastern Quadrant systems, Alex found himself observing how Eliza interacted with various platform personnel. She didn't demand deference or emphasize her new authority. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to responses, and engaged with ideas based on their merit rather than their source. Whether speaking with senior engineers or maintenance apprentices, she maintained the same focused respect for technical knowledge demonstrated through work rather than claimed through position. How do you balance technical precision with operational realities? Alex asked as they completed their inspection. Everyone respects your expertise now, but that must create pressure to have all the answers. Eliza considered the question with her characteristic thoroughness, giving it the same careful attention she applied to technical problems. The pressure isn't to have all the answers, she said finally. It's to approach questions with the right methodology. Technical excellence isn't about infallibility. It's about rigorous process and intellectual honesty. Sometimes the most important expertise is recognizing the limits of what you know and the discipline to verify what you think. It was a perspective that contradicted the common assumption that authority required projecting constant certainty, a more nuanced understanding that valued process over personality and verification over assertion. As they walked back toward the control center, Alex found himself reflecting on how this approach applied not just to technical systems, but to professional development more broadly. The investigation into Marcus Davis's death has been reopened, Eliza said, changing the subject as they approached the main corridor. The forensic evidence suggests his accident was an early test of the sabotage methodology. Alex nodded, understanding the significance of this development. His daughter is graduating next month, isn't she? Yes, Eliza confirmed, something shifting subtly in her expression. Engineering degree from the mainland university. She's been offered a position with the Coastal Operations Division. Will you attend the graduation? Alex asked, then immediately wondered if the question was too personal. Eliza was quiet for a moment, her focus seeming to turn inward. "Yes," she said finally. "I made a promise to complete the inspection he never finished. That obligation is fulfilled now, but there's a different kind of promise in seeing his daughter enter the field he valued." There was something profound in her response, a recognition that professional obligations extended beyond technical tasks to the human connections that gave them meaning. Excellence wasn't just about system integrity, but about honoring the people whose work you continued and whose legacy you sustained through your own commitment to getting things right. As they reached the control center, Director Harmon approached, tablet in hand. "Specialist Reeves, we've received the preliminary findings from the corporate investigation into Chun's activities. It appears he was working for a competitor seeking to discredit our safety record before the merger negotiations." Eliza nodded, absorbing this information with professional focus. "Have they identified any potential accomplices on other platforms?" "That's our next priority," Harmon confirmed. "We're implementing your enhanced monitoring protocols fleet-wide as a precaution. The board wants you to oversee the implementation personally. I'll prepare a deployment schedule by tomorrow morning." Eliza replied, already considering the technical requirements and personnel allocations that would be necessary. As Harmon continued briefing her on the corporate investigation, Alex excused himself and returned to his monitoring station. From his position, he could see the control room operations continuing with renewed purpose and precision. The screens that had once shown isolated system metrics now displayed the integrated pattern recognition indicators that Eliza had pioneered and that he had helped refine and implement. He thought about the transformation that had occurred in just 3 months, not just in the technical systems, but in the platform culture that surrounded them. The dismissive attitudes that had once been tolerated had been replaced by a more thoughtful approach to expertise. The hierarchical barriers that had prevented critical information from reaching decision-makers had been restructured to prioritize technical knowledge over positional authority. Most importantly, the definition of excellence itself had shifted. It was no longer about claiming knowledge or asserting authority, but about demonstrating capability through rigorous work and measurable results. Eliza hadn't changed the platform by demanding recognition. She had transformed it by exemplifying a standard of technical integrity that proved its value when it mattered most. By 1600 hours, word of the reopened investigation into Marcus Davis's death had spread throughout the platform. In the mess hall, conversations focused on the implications of this development and the broader changes that had followed the Sabotage incident. Veterans who had worked with Davis shared stories of his technical precision and commitment to safety protocols. Newer personnel listened with the particular attention of people recognizing that they were hearing something important about their professional community and its values. The same supervisors who had once dismissed expertise they didn't recognize now led discussions about verification protocols and the importance of technical qualification in safety-critical decisions. Not because they had been ordered to change their approach, but because experience had taught them that genuine capability mattered more than appearance or position when lives were at stake. Alex sat with a group of technical specialists, contributing occasionally to the conversation, but mostly observing the cultural shift happening around him. 3 months earlier, these discussions would have focused on procedures and hierarchies. Now they centered on expertise and verification, on the responsibility that came with technical knowledge and the importance of speaking up when patterns didn't match expectations. Later that evening, as the platform transitioned to night operations, Alex found himself walking past the memorial wall near the personnel quarters. The wall honored those who had died during platform operations, their names engraved in metal plates alongside their positions and dates of service. Marcus Davis's name was there, the plate still new enough that it hadn't developed the patina that characterized the older memorials. Someone had placed a small technical manual beside the plate, not flowers or personal mementos, but the kind of professional tribute that would have meant something to someone who valued technical precision above sentiment. The manual was open to a section on system integrity protocols, a page that Davis had apparently annotated extensively during his time on the platform. As Alex studied the memorial, he noticed Eliza approaching. She carried a data tablet and what looked like an engineering certification in a simple frame. She nodded to Alex but didn't speak as she placed the framed certification beside Davis's memorial plate. The document showed completion of the Echo 7 training program, dated 3 years earlier, with Davis listed as the recommending supervisor. He believed in technical excellence as its own reward, Eliza said quietly, her voice carrying the particular weight of someone honoring not just a colleague but a mentor. Not for recognition or advancement, but because getting it right mattered. Alex nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture. The certification represented not just professional achievement, but a continuation of values that transcended individual careers, a commitment to excellence that passed from one generation of specialists to the next. His daughter has the same approach to engineering problems, Eliza continued. The same insistence on verification before conclusion. The same respect for patterns that don't match expectations. You've been in contact with her? Alex asked. Since the investigation reopened, Eliza confirmed. She deserved to know that her father's death wasn't a random accident, that it happened because he noticed something others missed, just as he always taught her to do. There was something profoundly meaningful in this continuation, not just of professional knowledge, but of values that defined how that knowledge was applied. Davis's technical legacy lived on not just in operational protocols or system designs, but in the approach to excellence that he had instilled in both his daughter and the colleague who had uncovered the truth about his death. Will she work on offshore platforms? Alex asked. She's been assigned to coastal operations initially, Eliza replied. But she's already applied for the Echo 7 program. Says she wants to continue what her father started. The platform hummed around them, its operations continuing with the steady precision that characterized well-maintained systems. Somewhere in the distance, a shift change announcement echoed through the corridors. The ordinary rhythms of platform life continued, but with a different quality, now a more attentive approach to anomalies, a deeper respect for expertise, a clearer understanding that excellence wasn't about position, but about performance when it mattered most. Eliza turned from the memorial wall, her focus shifting back to the present responsibilities awaiting her attention. The fleet-wide monitoring protocols need final verification before implementation, she said, her voice returning to its professional clarity. Would you be interested in assisting with the parameter calibration? Your work on the visual pattern recognition would be valuable in the broader deployment. The invitation carried a particular weight, not just an assignment, but a recognition of developing expertise, an acknowledgement that Alex's technical contributions merited inclusion in a project with industry-wide implications. This wasn't the perfunctory inclusion of a junior staff member. It was the professional respect accorded to someone whose work had demonstrated genuine value. I'd be honored, Alex replied, understanding that he was being offered not just a technical opportunity, but a chance to contribute to a legacy of excellence that extended beyond individual careers or specific platforms. As they walked toward the technical center where the new protocols would be finalized, Alex found himself reflecting on how profoundly his understanding of professional excellence had evolved in just 3 months. He had entered the industry with conventional assumptions about authority and advancement. He was continuing with a deeper appreciation for expertise demonstrated through work rather than claimed through position, for the quiet integrity that valued getting things right because lives depended on it, not because recognition would follow. The platform continued its eternal operation, metal and technology suspended above the implacable ocean. But something fundamental had changed in how that operation was managed and monitored. Not because of new regulations or corporate mandates, but because one specialist had maintained her focus on technical integrity when others were, distracted by appearance and position, had persisted in identifying patterns others dismissed, had demonstrated through action rather than assertion what genuine expertise looked like. And in that persistence, in that uncompromising commitment to excellence for its own sake, she had not just prevented a disaster but transformed a culture, had shown that true expertise didn't need to demand attention to prove its value. It simply needed the opportunity to demonstrate its worth through the work itself. The ocean stretched endlessly around Rigel Station Alpha, its power and danger a constant reminder of what was at stake in their daily operations. But within the platform's complex systems, a different kind of power had been recognized and respected, the power of expertise applied with integrity, of technical excellence valued for the safety it provided rather than the status it conferred. Some lessons, Alex reflected as he watched Eliza begin the calibration of the new monitoring systems, weren't taught in technical manuals or training programs. They were demonstrated through the quiet commitment to getting things right when it mattered most, through the persistence that continued asking questions when patterns didn't match expectations, through the courage that valued accuracy over acceptance. In the reflection of the monitoring screens, Alex caught a glimpse of his own expression, more focused now, more attentive to details, more willing to verify rather than assume. Not because regulations required it or because recognition would follow, but because excellence itself mattered. Because getting it right was its own reward. Because that was the legacy that truly endured when individual careers and accomplishments faded into platform history. And in that reflection, in that subtle but fundamental shift in professional values, the true impact of Eliza's example became clear. She hadn't just prevented a sabotage attempt or advanced to a leadership position. She had demonstrated what genuine expertise looked like when stripped of hierarchical trappings and positional authority, had shown that technical integrity wasn't about who you were but about how precisely you observed, how thoroughly you verified, and how persistently you pursued the patterns that others missed. The platform continued its operation above the restless ocean, its systems now monitored with renewed attention and respect for the subtle indicators that might signal emerging problems. And in that renewed vigilance, in that cultural transformation from dismissal to verification, Eliza's most significant contribution became clear. She hadn't just identified a sabotage attempt. She had redefined what excellence meant in an environment where precision wasn't just professionally valuable, but essential for survival. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.